Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are taking on something truly fundamental. We're working from source material our listeners sent in, and it's from Dr. Roy E. Richmond's seminal article, We Have Prayed Amiss.
And this isn't just, a piece of religious commentary. This is a massive metaphysical challenge to how people have related to the divine for centuries.
It really is.
Yeah.
Dr. Roy confronts this universal experience we all know of yearning, of pleading, of offering desperate devotion, and he comes to a staggering conclusion.
He says that while the intention behind it all was honest, that's important, it was also deeply, fundamentally misdirected.
That just sets the stage immediately, doesn't it?
Ah.
So our mission today is to navigate this revolutionary idea he puts forward, that the divine source isn't external. It's not separate or in need of our persuasion.
It's entirely and eternally within.
And we really need to understand how that one shift transforms, everything. How it changes the practice we call prayer from this outward begging to an inward conscious conversation and a profound thanksgiving.
To even get started, we have to adopt his language. We have to use Dr. Roy's new lexicon because the traditional words like man and God, they're just steeped in that very separation he's trying to dismantle.
Precisely. If we're trying to talk about conversing with a source that's inside us, we can't keep using language that paints us as these frail, separate creatures.
Exactly.
So Dr. Roy tells us to replace the word human with visible breath.
Visible breath. It's an incredibly powerful term, isn't it? It immediately establishes that our identity is one of continuity, not separation.
It really does.
It grounds our very existence in the eternal origin. We're not just, complex biological machines. We are the visible expression of the invisible, infinite life source.
So if we are breath made visible,
then the source of that breath has to be inside us. It has to be resident, constantly flowing.
And when he talks about the deepest part of us, the core of our identity that's indivisible from the divine, he calls it the sacred self.
Yes, the sacred self. That's the eternal core, the part that can't be separated, can't be judged, and this is key. It cannot lack anything.
So if you accept that definition, that an individual is visible breath embodying the sacred self, what happens to the old way of praying?
The whole idea of crying out to some external deity for validation or for resources, it just collapses. The sacred self, which is already one with the source, or Elohim, as he often calls it, it can't receive from an external god.
Because the source is already fully resident. It's already there, operating from within.
You've got it. And that single concept, that's the anchor for everything else that follows.
The core truth. There's only one source, one essence, one energy, one divine presence.
And that presence is within. If you can really internalize that one idea, the whole mystery of so-called unanswered prayers just starts to unravel.
Right. It eliminates the very possibility of separation. If the source is one, and that one source breathes us into being, the distance is just an illusion. Okay, so we've established the foundation. The intention was honest, but the direction was flawed. Let's dig into what Dr. Roy says is the single biggest psychological failure that came from this mistaken direction. That's section 1, the illusion of separation.
And we have to just acknowledge the historical weight here. I mean, the sheer human energy poured into traditional prayer it's astronomical.
Billions of people for thousands of years.
Exactly. Generations dedicating themselves to praying, pleading, bargaining, even demanding from what they thought was an external power source.
Whether that's a deity in the sky or Jesus as an intermediary.
Right. Or appealing to saints or ancestors. The structure was always the same.
I lack, you have, and I have to convince you to give it to me.
That's it in a nutshell. And we see that pattern everywhere, across so many cultures. This belief that some power structure outside of us has to be convinced of our worth or our need or our sincerity.
Like the source is, busy, distracted, or even worse, that it's selectively judgmental.
And that right there is the critical root cause of playing amiss. It's that foundational awareness of separation.
The starting point is wrong.
The starting premise is that you are separate from the divine. And if that's where you begin, then your entire life becomes this attempt to bridge that distance. Prayer becomes a kind of desperate communication technology.
You're trying to send a signal to someone far, far away.
Hoping they'll hear you, hoping they'll send resources or attention your way.
I have to pause here, though, because for you, the listener, if you're grappling with real physical pain, or you're afraid of failing, or you're in a financial crisis, it's easy to say the source is within.
Of course.
But that immediate primal urge is to call out to something bigger than yourself, something outside of the current painful situation. How does Dr. Roy reconcile that feeling of separation with the eternal truth of oneness?
That is the core tension, isn't it? And he addresses it directly. He points out that the feeling of separation is just the limited awareness of the earthly personality.
The ego.
You could call it the ego, yes.
Yeah.
It's the part that's focused on the visible world, the world of effects. But the true metaphysical reality, he argues, is the unshapable truth that there is no external God.
There's only that unified source, that one essence.
Which is entirely and constantly within you. The visible person is just experiencing a gap between their earthly awareness and their sacred self.
So the sacred self, which is the expression of the source, it can't receive life or health or money from some external God because the source is already there. It's a closed system. It's an eternal union.
And that's exactly why the prayers felt unanswered. People were waiting for an external entity, a God they created in their own image, distant, maybe judgmental or busy.
Waiting for that God to intervene in the external world.
Yes. They waited for an answer delivered from the sky, and they failed to recognize that the resource, the answer, the wholeness, it was already there. It was resident within the very breath they were taking.
It's like you're standing in a room with a perfect high-speed Wi-Fi signal, but instead of just opening your phone and connecting,
you spend hours praying fervently to a distant satellite you imagine might someday be able to send you a signal.
That's a perfect analogy. The problem is never the signal strength. It's never the availability of the resource.
Never. The source never withheld. Dr. Roy is emphatic about this. The life source never needed persuasion. It never turned away. The problem was solely awareness on the part of the one praying.
The connection was just overlooked because the seeker was looking in the wrong direction.
The resource was present, the alignment was missing, the source, the breath is completely reliable. But if you don't realize you're already connected, all you experience is lack.
Wow. And that misunderstanding, it places this enormous burden on the visible breath. Well, if I believe the source is external, then it's all on me. It's up to me to be good enough or persuasive enough, worthy enough to earn that intervention. But if the source is within, the burden shifts entirely. It's not about earning it anymore. It's about recognition and alignment.
Exactly. The whole system shifts. It goes from being based on merit and worthiness and external judgment to a system based on inherent identity and eternal inclusion. It removes the fear of rejection.
Because the sacred self is the divine presence, breathing itself into visibility.
Yeah.
How can it be rejected?
It can't. And this failure of awareness, this whole illusion, it leads us right into Section 2, linguistic concealment, because Dr. Roy shows this wasn't just a psychological mistake.
Right. It was actually codified. It was built right into our language through translation.
And the most pivotal example he gives, the most critical piece of linguistic evidence, focuses on one Greek word. Patra, which was consistently and simply rendered as father.
And that seems so innocent on the surface. But Dr. Roy argues that this one choice concealed the inner source from millions of people.
Think about it. When the Christian texts were translated into European languages, especially English, the word father was chosen. For any modern English reader, what does father immediately bring to mind?
An external person, a masculine parent, probably authoritative.
Exactly. A figure who is separate, spatially distant, probably hierarchical, looking down from above.
So that one translation choice didn't just translate a word. It codified the entire theology of separation we were just talking about.
It did. It reinforced this idea of a distant transactional relationship. The choice wasn't just, a little inaccurate. It was devastating to the original metaphysical concept.
Absolutely devastating. Because if you read those texts through the lens of a celestial father who lives somewhere else,
then every request automatically becomes a petition for a resource that you lack.
A resource which he might grant or might withhold based on your merit.
And that cements the entire structure of praying amiss.
So what is the true, deeper meaning of Patra that Dr. Roy reveals?
He clarifies that it doesn't mean an external masculine parent figure, not in the way we think of it today. Its profound, deeper meaning is something more like lineage or ancestral source, the origin from which consciousness emerges.
Wow. Okay, so think of it less like a person.
And more like the root or the fountainhead of being. When you translate it that way, the concept immediately shifts. It's no longer a geographical figure. It's a spiritual continuum.
Lineage. That implies that the nature of the source is, it's inherited. It's inherent in the visible breath.
Precisely. If I'm connected to the lineage or the ancestral source, then I carry the essence of that origin right inside my own identity. The connection isn't external, it's organic. It's internal. This is a truly radical rereading of foundational theology.
And the linguistic detail goes even deeper because Dr. Roy brings in the Aramaic context, the language Jesus would have actually spoken. Why is that Aramaic root so important here?
Well, scholars consider Aramaic to be a much more direct linguistic link to Jesus' original teachings, to his intent, before all the theological filtering of the later Greek and Latin translations.
So what did the word mean in Aramaic?
In Aramaic, the word that's often translated as father meant the inner root of being.
The inner root of being.
Yes, or the life source that breathes itself as every sacred self. It's a description of omnipresence and immanence. It's not about a person at all.
That sounds much more like the pulsing energy we talked about before, like the breath itself.
It is. The Aramaic terminology just prevents the conceptual separation from even happening. So when Jesus spoke, he wasn't addressing some man-god on a distant throne.
He was acknowledging and communing with the deepest, most inherent part of his own existence.
The very origin, the root, the life source of his own consciousness that was pulsating within him and as him.
So, to just summarize Dr. Roy's linguistic conclusion here, Jesus did not pray to an external deity. He communed with the very source of his existence. He conversed with the eternal origin that pulses his own breath.
And that changes everything about how we understand his actions, his teaching.
He's the essential aha moment.
It is. The act of communing was never about reaching out to the distant. It was about grounding down and aligning inward with the source that is inherent. If you accept this linguistic truth, then the path Jesus modeled isn't an external religious doctrine.
It's an internal metaphysical path of awakening to our own sacred self.
And think about the implications. If the source is within and we are visible breath, then the entire structure of traditional religion, with its intermediaries and rituals and holy places,
it's all predicated on a foundational misunderstanding of where the divine is actually located.
That's the implication. The entire infrastructure that was built on the premise of separation. Suddenly, its foundation gets very shaky. The resources, the connection, they were never outside the temple of the body. They were always resident.
The challenge, then, is just moving the awareness of the visible person from that external search to the internal recognition.
That's the whole journey.
So, if Jesus wasn't praying upward, what exactly was he doing when he spoke? That brings us to Section 3, the allegorical unveiling. Dr. Roy emphasizes that we have to hear the Gospels metaphysically.
Absolutely. We have to stop interpreting his words literally as if they're just external historical actions. We need to start hearing them as internal revelations. It's the sacred self speaking from the realm of oneness.
He wasn't giving theological instruction.
He was demonstrating the reality of living out of eternal union.
And Dr. Roy gives us this powerful example by retranslating and analyzing John chapter 17 from his own Richmond Tree of Life Bible translations. Now, this chapter is traditionally read as Jesus praying to the Father.
Yes, praying before his departure, but Dr. Roy reads it as an internal declaration. Let's start with verse 24, because the shift in meaning here is it's profound.
Okay, so the traditional translations often make verse 24 sound like a request, right? Like he's asking for his followers to be physically taken to heaven later. Something like, Father, I desire that they also, whom you have given me, may be with me where I am to see my glory.
Right. Which again reinforces that whole theology of shared geography, that one day we'll join Jesus in a different, distant location.
But that's not what Dr. Roy's translation says.
Not at all. His translation unveils the metaphysical intent. It reads, Divine presence, I desire that those whose awareness is awakening through me may be with me in the realization of our eternal union.
In the realization of.
That they may perceive the radiance that the divine voice of breath has revealed in me. For breath embraced me in love before visibility began.
The focus shifts entirely. It's not about physical location anymore. It's about a spiritual state, eternal union and realization. He's desiring a shared level of consciousness.
This is the crucial distinction Dr. Roy makes. He says the Greek word here doesn't point to a shared location. It points to shared awareness, shared knowledge.
So Jesus isn't asking for a transportation plan.
No. He's voicing the deepest longing of the sacred self, that the visible part of his disciples awakens to the reality that they are already one with the source, just as he knows himself to be. It's a desire for intellectual and spiritual parity.
That resonates so strongly with the profile of our listener, who's always seeking that knowledge, those aha moments. This is knowledge being revealed, not a destination being promised.
It is. Think of it like learning a language. You can be in the country where it's spoken, that's shared geography, but if you don't understand the words, you're still separate.
Right.
But true fluency, that's shared awareness. That means the knowledge is active within you no matter where you're standing. Jesus is calling them into fluency in the language of oneness.
Let's move to verse 25, which seems to reinforce this idea of internal knowledge.
Yes. Righteous presence. The world awareness has not known breath, but I have known the voice of breath in me. And these awakening ones have come to know that I embody the expression.
I have known the voice of breath in me. That phrase is a pure declaration of internal communion.
It is. It's not, I received a message from outside. It is, the voice of the source is known to me as my own inner voice. He's confirming his identity as the direct, embodied expression of that source.
And then verse 26 connects this internal knowledge to divine love, or agape love.
It does, and I have unveiled to them divine presence as breath, eternal life, and will continue to unveil it, so that the agape love with which I am loved may awaken in them, and that breath may be known in them as their true life.
So this whole passage encapsulates the mission. The purpose of this unveiling isn't to start a new religion.
No. It's to activate the agape love, that unconditional, eternal, non-transactional love of the source, so that it awakens in them. The goal is the experiential knowing of breath as their true life, not a borrowed life or a granted life.
So these lines are definitively not prayers to an external being. They are the awakened sacred self communing with the essence within. It's a conversation inward.
Not upward. It is the sound of oneness speaking through visible breath. So, if Jesus wasn't making requests, if he wasn't trying to persuade Elohim, what was he allegorically doing in this moment?
Dr. Roy suggests he was engaged in a profound internal action. He was revealing the divine mind's movement within him, and he was engaging in thankful withdrawal from what already is.
And that concept of thankful withdrawal is so key, and it's the polar opposite of petition.
Right. When you petition, you're assuming a lack.
But when you withdraw, you are acknowledging the eternal presence of the resource. You're moving your awareness away from the visible lack and into the invisible reality. His words were not requests. They were awareness, thanksgiving, and an alignment with the eternal reality that existed long before visibility even appeared.
Let's go back to that specific phrase in verse 24. I desire that they be with me. You said the theological error was inserting the idea of location, of shared geography.
Yes. Translators assumed this physical separation, heaven and earth, so they interpreted be with me as a future physical relocation. But Dr. Roy points out the Greek is pointing to a psychological and spiritual condition.
A state of being.
A state of being. Jesus was expressing the longing of the awakened sacred self for every faculty within the earthly person to rise into that same state of eternal oneness.
So it's an internal call to action, like he's engaging different parts of our own consciousness.
Yeah. Precisely. And this is where the beautiful allegorical language comes into play. Dr. Roy interprets this as an internal dynamic. It is wisdom calling understanding to stand up within the individual.
Wow.
It is perception inviting vision to see the truth. It is the inner consecrated messenger, the fully aware sacred self-awakening every sleeping element of the earthly personality.
So the conversation itself is the internal mechanism of transformation. It's the sacred self starting an awakening.
Yes, it's saying, come up higher into the awareness of what you already are. It is self-directed evolution of consciousness. The challenge is never convincing the source to come down. The challenge is convincing your own awareness to rise up into the reality of the source within.
This makes the visible breath an active participant in their own awakening.
Instead of a passive recipient waiting for external grace. That's the whole shift. So now that we've established the metaphysical reality of the source within and the linguistic error that concealed it, we can transition to section 4, the proper way.
This is the practical part, the conscious conversation of thankful withdrawal. This is where the rubber meets the road. If true prayer isn't asking or pleading or negotiating, how do we actually do it? How do we converse with the source?
Dr. Roy defines it as an inner conversation of thanksgiving, a conscious and constant withdrawal from the illusion of lack and into the reality of what is eternally true. And then, critically, speaking as the voice of breath over others' lives, it's a dual movement, resting internally and then declaring externally.
I find that term conscious and constant withdrawal really fascinating because it reframes the whole idea of spiritual practice.
How so?
It suggests that the external world is just perpetually distracting us from an eternal fact. And our practice is simply the action of pulling our awareness back to that fact. over and over.
It is the highest form of mindfulness, but applied to metaphysics. And this inner conversation, it involves the awakened sacred self speaking, conscious awareness listening, the divine mind illuminating the eternal truth, and the breath empowering the declaration that follows.
It's an active, ongoing internal alignment.
And it bypasses the ego's tendency towards scarcity thinking.
Let's ground this for our listener. Let's use the 3 core examples Dr. Roy provides to make this mechanism of withdrawal crystal clear.
Okay. We can contrast the old way, the language of petition, with the new way, the language of withdrawal. The old way is always based on the assumption of lack.
Right. So let's take the experience of illness. Instead of the old prayer, give me healing,
The sacred self withdraws from the appearance of disease and rests in the truth.
which is, I exist as wholeness.
The shift is fundamental. You stop trying to generate healing from the outside, and you rest in the eternal truth that the source, which is resident within, is wholeness. The illness is just treated as a temporary, visible misalignment, not an eternal fact about you.
Okay, next, the issue of security. Instead of saying, protect me, which implies that I'm vulnerable and there's a threat,
The sacred self withdraws from the threat and rests in the truth. I exist as safety.
this replaces that reactive anxiety we get from external fear.
With the affirmation of eternal presence, which is inherently secure. It's non-vulnerable. You are literally withdrawing your conscious attention from the fearful news cycle and placing it firmly on the unshakable reality of your sacred self.
And finally, economic need, the big one. Instead of provide for me, which implies the source is holding something back.
The sacred self withdraws into the truth. I exist as abundance.
This acknowledges the source within as the constant infinite supply.
Right. Rather than waiting for external circumstances, a job, a lottery ticket to align, the focus is on the source of the abundance, not the visible form it's going to take.
And Dr. Roy is really clear that nothing was wrong with the sincerity of the old way, the heartfelt emotions, the tears. None of that was wrong.
No, not at all. The issue was purely a lack of understanding, a misunderstanding about the location of the source.
So this new method is designed to return us to the way Jesus lived and spoke.
Exactly. Not pleading upward, but communing inward. Not asking for something that is lacking, but consciously dwelling in the divine presence that breathes us.
It's a move from transactional begging to relational recognition.
And that recognition is expressed through the language of thankful withdrawal.
This recognition requires some very specific, actionable shifts in our language. And that's what Section 5 provides, transforming the 25 common prayers.
This is the practical blueprint.
We should analyze a few of the most challenging ones to really understand the psychological hurdle that's required for this kind of shift.
It's a great idea, because the move from petition to declaration is easy to talk about, but it can be incredibly difficult to execute, especially in moments of distress. You're moving from the reactive brain that sees lack to the sacred self that knows wholeness.
Okay, let's start with Category A, health and inner state. And let's focus specifically on healing. As we mentioned, this is where the cognitive dissonance between the eternal truth and the visible reality can be the sharpest.
Right. Traditionally, this is a desperate plea for an external fix. The transformation is, I rest in the wholeness that I exist as divine health. The psychological hurdle here is substantial. How do you rest in wholeness when your body is screaming in pain?
Exactly my question. For the listener who's grappling with chronic pain, isn't telling them to simply withdraw into wholeness. Doesn't that risk sounding like you're minimizing their visible reality?
It's a fair question, and Dr. Roy addresses it by differentiating between the appearance, the visible effect, and the reality, the eternal cause. He's not saying deny the pain, he's saying deny the power of the pain to define the sacred self.
Okay, that's a key distinction.
The visible breath is experiencing a misalignment, but the sacred self remains whole. The conscious conversation is about aligning your awareness with that eternal truth, which then, over time, begins to influence the visible expression, your body.
So it's an internal recalibration. You're confirming that your default state is health, regardless of the temporary signal of imbalance.
Yes. Which means the conversation isn't a one-time request. It has to be a persistent mental discipline, constantly withdrawing your awareness from the symptom and planting it back in the source.
And the inner states follow that same pattern. Instead of praying for peace of mind, which acknowledges turbulence,
The declaration is, my conscious awareness rests in calmness. The calmness is the default setting of the source within. The visible breath is simply choosing to rest its awareness in that source. instead of riding the waves of external chaos.
Let's take relief from guilt. That's so often tied up in external religious concepts of sin and punishment.
The transformation for that one is radical. It becomes, I withdraw from my innocence in Elohim.
Wow.
It just dissolves the concept of needing external forgiveness from a judge. If the sacred self is eternal union, then innocence is an eternal, unshakable fact. Guilt is just an emotional belief in separation. So the conversation is one of returning to the self-evident fact of your own inclusion.
Okay, let's move to Category B, provision and security. Let's focus on financial stability, the arena of scarcity.
The request for money from an external source is the ultimate praying amiss. The transformation is, I withdraw from the abundance that flows from the source within that is my true supply.
The difficulty here is the practical application. When the rent is due, withdrawing into an abstract concept of abundance, that feels very counterintuitive.
It requires a massive leap of faith, away from external circumstances and toward internal reliability.
You have to acknowledge that all visible forms of supply, salaries, investments, gifts are just the effect.
They're the effect of the internal infinite source. If the source within is abundance, then the task isn't to beg for money. The task is to align yourself so that the inherent abundance flows forth into a visible form. The conversation is constantly reminding your conscious awareness. I am the expression of infinite supply. I am already provided for.
And the common request for rescue from crisis, when everything is visibly falling apart around you.
That transforms to, I rest in the stability already mine. This is the recognition that the visible crisis is happening in the realm of temporal, visible effects. The stability of the sacred self, of the eternal union, is not affected by external turmoil.
So the conversation is an act of refusal.
It's an active refusal to allow the visible drama to hijack your inner awareness of eternal stability.
Let's tackle Category C, relationships, and external focus. This is where people most often want the source to intervene and, well, change other people. How does Dr. Roy handle the request for changing others?
This is maybe the hardest shift of all because it requires abandoning control. The petition transforms into, I bless them in their own awakening.
The focus shifts completely.
Entirely, from trying to manage or fix another visible breath to honoring their own source connection and their own potential for awakening.
So instead of praying, make my difficult coworker kinder, I'm actually declaring a blessing over their independent journey toward their own sacred self.
Exactly. You are speaking as the voice of breath over them, acknowledging their innate wholeness. You're not speaking to an external God asking for manipulative intervention. The conversation is one of radical acceptance and blessing.
Okay, finally, Category D, wisdom and existential truth. Let's look at salvation concerns. This is tied to centuries of fearing eternal punishment.
The transformation here is profound because it dissolves the need for the question itself. It becomes, I exist one with Elohim and always have and always am safe from any hindrance to that fact.
That one statement just obliterates the entire theology of separation and judgment. If you always have existed one with Elohim, then salvation isn't a future event you have to earn or be granted.
It's an eternal, present reality. The internal conversation becomes one of thankful acknowledgement, not anxious seeking. There's no need for external salvation if eternal union is the inherent, unshakable reality. This is the ultimate act of thankful withdrawal, withdrawing from the fear of eternal judgment and resting in the eternal truth of safety.
And even something as small, as seemingly mundane, as blessing food is reframed, it's not a ritual anymore, it's pure consciousness.
It moves from a request for transformation to an act of conscious gratitude. I receive with awareness and gratitude and am always thankful. It's a moment-by-moment recognition of the flow of supply, acknowledging that every visible breath is sustained by the omnipresent source.
The power of Dr. Roy's list in Final Synthesis is that it demonstrates this conversion has to be the constant activity of the awakened sacred self. It's the language of oneness.
Yes. Not directed outward to persuade, but arising from within to align and acknowledge. It is the highest form of conscious living. It demands that the visible breath step fully into its identity as the expression of the source. You stop playing the role of the beggar.
And you start operating from the reality of being the owner of the infinite supply.
Which is the source breathing you.
So to recap this deep dive into Dr. Roy E. Richmond's insights, we've established that a true conversation with the source requires this radical, immediate, and constant shift in our awareness.
Right, a shift from the illusion of separation to the reality of eternal union.
We dissected how terms like the Greek Patra were mistranslated as father, and how that concealed the original Aramaic meaning of the inner root of being.
Which positioned the source as inherent and constantly pulsing within us, rather than distant and separate.
And we analyzed that profound metaphysical declaration in John chapter 17, confirming that Jesus was speaking not as a petitioner.
But as the awakened sacred self, declaring the reality of oneness and inviting others into the same shared awareness, not a shared geography.
And most practically, we explored the mechanics of thankful withdrawal. We talked about moving the conversation from scarcity-based begging, give me what I lack,
To abundance-based declaration, I rest in the wholeness and abundance that I already exist as. This transformation is the moment-by-moment work of the visible breath.
this knowledge, it really provides a shortcut, not just to theological or philosophical understanding, but to profound practical change. It's an invitation to transform the core mechanism of your spiritual life from external seeking to internal resting and recognition.
It replaces fear and anxiety with the conscious enjoyment of a conscious conversation with the source within.
And as we close this deep dive, let's leave you, the learner, with a provocative thought that builds directly on the power of that allegorical unveiling.
If Jesus' desire was for you to rise into the same awareness of eternal oneness, to enjoy the eternal union he embodied, what specific internal faculty of yours, is it your critical intellect, your emotional body, your visual imagination, is currently waiting for your sacred self to invite it up higher?
And if we fully internalize this truth, that we are a visible breath and that the divine presence literally breathes us, what necessary action or challenge or creative endeavor does that realization demand of you today? If you are the active expression of the One Essence, what purpose are you ready to manifest?
That is the conversation every sacred self is invited to enjoy. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.